for London, and my pronouns are she, her. It's so great to see so many familiar faces and some new names in the participant list. We are so excited for this conversation. We Dr. Dias, otherwise known as Janice to me, but Janice has been doing a lot of press for her book, Parent Like It Matters, but I am not a member of the press. I am a fellow mother of a teenager. I studied sociology at Brandeis as well, and we both work in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. So just so you know, that's the perspective we're going to bring to this conversation, and we're very much looking forward to having it with you. So I have some questions prepared for Janice, but we definitely want to leave plenty of time for you to engage with us and ask your questions. You can certainly do that through the chat, or you can raise your hand if you're interested in actually asking them out loud. We'd love to hear your voices and see your faces. So please don't feel shy about that. So Janice, are you ready to get started?
I am ready to get started.
Good, because I'm going to quote yourself back to you. In your book, you say, being asked questions is still one of the ways I feel most heard and appreciated. Questions suggest that you are interested in what I am thinking. And I think we're all interested in what you're thinking. And I know this goes to credit your grandmother who raised you for many years. So let's get started with some questions. So for those of you who have known Janice in the past, or maybe have heard her speak, you may be wondering about her name. And so I think it's important, you may have known her as Janice, as I certainly did for many years, but I think it's important to start with kind of the origin story here and talk a little bit about Janice and your name, which is something that is so crucial to a critical piece of someone's identity. So Janice, do you want to start with that, and then we'll get into it?
Yes. So hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. It's noontime. I hope to keep you fully awake for all of the labor that you have ahead. So I came to the United States May 19th, 1984. And in Jamaica, where I grew up in Retreat St. Mary in rural Jamaica, and then in 1980 moved to Kingston, and in 84 came to Boston, Dorchester to be precise, Ashmont area. And in Jamaica, I had completed my common entrance exam, which is probably analogous to your SATs in order to enter high school. And it is probably one of the first times that I actually talked much about my name, because I have a family name. And then when you go to school, you have a formal name. And when I came to the United States that fall, my mother enrolled me in Woodrow Wilson Middle School, which was 1 block away from my house. And I entered the 7th grade. In the 7th grade in the United States, at least in Boston in the 1980s, you had to learn grammar and you had to learn the parts of speech. And I had a classroom and I was filled, so I'd only been here a couple of months at that time. And the teacher, but I'd been really well versed in grammar. Jamaicans and the British are very serious about grammar. And the instructor asked about different forms of punctuation. He asked, what do you put at the end of a sentence if you're surprised, right? And we raised our hands and he called on people, exclamation mark. What do you put at the end of a question mark? And then he asked, what do you put at the end of a declarative sentence? And I raised my hand and another student did as well. And he called on me and I said, full stop. And apparently that's not an American phrase, a full stop. So the other student and several students started laughing. They were like, oh my God, you put your period. And the only context in which I knew the word period was for menstruation. And I thought it was absolutely impossible that one could put one's period at the end of a sentence. And so with a thick Jamaican accent, I said, well, you don't have no sense. You can't put your period at the end of a sentence. And that led to laughter everywhere. And the teacher looked at me and said, well, what is your name? And I said, my name is Janice. And he responded, Janice. And from that day on, I became Janice. And because of the laughter and because of that space, all the things I wanted to do, one, I did not want that level of attention. And it was easier to simply comply with being Janice rather than being Janice. So fast forward 33 years later, I am doing the audio recording for my book. And the director of the book is a person who is from a colonized country like mine. And she said, well, how do you say your name? And I said, well, people call me Janice. And she was like, well, why do you say people call you Janice? And I said, because my mother really named me Janice Johnson, but nobody called me Janice Johnson. And since I was doing the audiobook, and much of the book itself takes you back and forth between my life in the US and my life in Jamaica, she said, how would you like to proceed forward? Now, if you've read the book so far, you will see that I have a lot of thoughts and ideas about my mother, my grandmother, and the way I grew up. And some of it in the audiobook is really in Jamaican dialect. And to honor my mother, especially since I have really quite a strong critique of her, and to honor my heritage, I decided that going forward, that I would make this reclamation. And I would reclaim that moment and that laughter and that decision, and begin to refer, especially as I speak about the book, as Janice. And people ask me a lot about, but I've known you your whole life as Janice. I am very much still Janice, because who I am after all these years is not as fully Jamaican as I once was. And I will never be fully American as I am. So I am both comfortable with Janice as well as I am with Janice.
Thank you, Janice, for sharing that story. I think it holds so much power, especially in relation to how much influence adults have in children's lives. And especially as we talk about parents and caregivers, teachers are oftentimes significant caregivers to our children. And the fact that that one person in that context had so much power over your identity, I think makes us all reflect about how we interact with young people, whether we're parents or not. So I really appreciate you sharing that story. I know certainly as a former educator, I took it when I first heard it, really lots of emotions attached to hearing that story. So I appreciate you sharing it with all of us.
And I've been thinking a lot about that moment and that classroom, because a part of what occurred in that moment, now having looked back, is that the laughter that was allowed to really occur was really quite striking for me. It made me feel quite small in that moment. And the be nice that so many teachers talk about has a way of erasing us, right? And I didn't feel like erasure. I really just wanted to get along. I was already here. I had a lot of hostile feelings about migration. My brothers were quite excited to come to America. I was not very excited about coming to America because I had such really close girlfriends. I did not fantasize about what America is, but they did. So they were very excited. My mother worked really hard to get us here, but I was quite antagonistic for the first 3 years. And this was yet another thing that I was like, in Jamaica, I wouldn't have to explain myself, but here I am in America and I have to explain myself. I'm not going to do that. So I'll comply with whatever it is. And it really does, when I think about that moment now, every time I hear people say Janice, I just did not have the power or the agency to advocate for myself in that time. And it feels good to get to that place where I can advocate. And I know for like my friends who are Asian, my friends who are from the continent of Africa, they too just simply find shortcuts of navigating the classroom space because it's so difficult. And it's not even like the difficulty is simply the correction. It is difficult to push against the kind of Americanization of everything. And when you're the lonely child in the classroom, it's easier to just comply. And that erasure has so many different ways because it's not just name, it's in all these different places. Absolutely. And caregivers do that too.
Yeah. And I think, there's actually, that's one of the themes in the book that you talk about is how to avoid your child being the only in situations so that they have someone to stand with them and support them in those moments, right? So that they're not the only person, and that's, you can't, there's, sometimes you can't avoid those situations, but when you can, that's something that I think is really important that you talk about in the book. So speaking of the book, one of the things that I know I enjoyed about it was the stories that you told about your life, both as a child and how you were parented and brought up, but also as a parent. And I don't want to give that away for those folks who haven't read it yet, because it really is beautiful storytelling. So I do encourage you to read it. But I think one piece that you didn't tell in here, and I know it's something that has shaped you, is your time at Brandeis. So since we're here at an alumni event, and I think because I knew you then, I have a little insight into that time. I would love to hear about your time at Brandeis, your experience at Brandeis. What about that has shaped you as a parent, as a scholar, as just a human being in the world? Tell us a little bit about that experience and how it
So
has shaped you too.
Brandeis is a funny experience for me. So I came to Brandeis 2 days after finishing basic training in Fort Jackson, South Carolina. And I am the first in my family to go to college. My mother did not complete primary school, and much of my other folks really did. So again, to take you back to Retreat St. Mary, we went to an all-age school, which means from the time that Jamaica is not an age-based system. So if you can read and you're ready to go to school, you go to school. And so, kids as young as 3 are in school with kids as old as 16. 16 is typically when you graduate high school in Jamaica. Many people had to work. My mother left home very early, and so she didn't finish a formalized education, even though she is quite brilliant. My grandmother was born in 1901. And so education, much like the US in an agrarian society, you get a lot of education from church. So I came to the US, I had no intention or interest in going to college. I'm from a country that has a kind of a flat, or then had like a flat culture. You went to high school, you got a job, et cetera. And a few privileged people went to the University of the West Indies at Mona or the College of Arts, Science and Technology for architecture. So I had no aspiration, and I actually don't have much occupational aspirations even to this day, even though I've done so much. So I went to Boston Latin Academy, and the teachers there, how I got there is a funny story in and of itself, but the teachers there insisted that I needed to go to college. I found this mostly to be an irritation.
Really?
Because I had no interest in college. What was I going to go to college for? But I performed really well in school, and therefore they thought college was the next appropriate thing. And they rank you quite rigorously at Latin Academy, and they selected all the schools they thought fit my profile. And Brandeis was one of them. I did not want to stay in Massachusetts. My mom got quite ill. And I ended up staying because the expectation was that she was going to die. And so I would just stay. I would be close to home. She would die, and then I would go on to study in some other place in the country, primarily DC. Now, again, Americans don't think like this, but really, it's really how the situation was set up. Well, at the end of my high school senior year, I had a couple of friends from the football team who were like, well, how are you going to pay for college? And I was like, I don't even know what this college really is, but they want me to go. I said I would go. They're going to fill out the financial aid, and that's whatever it is, we'll figure it out. So they were like, the military will pay for you to go to college. And I was like, well, that means it's no stressor for my mother. And so I joined the military, and forgot one small but very important detail. I didn't tell my family that I joined the military. And so I went to basic training while my family was away in Jamaica for the summer because my aunt had died. And I stayed to graduate high school by myself, and I went to basic training, and I returned from basic training to go to this college. And my brother dropped me off, and I was at college. Now, I still had, this is 1990, my accent was fading, but it was still quite there. And how I summarize Brandeis, and the reason I tell you all of these things, because they become quite important about my Brandeis experience. So I don't know at that point how America's racial politics is. I went to Woodrow Wilson Middle School, was fairly integrated, a lot of Asian, primarily Chinese people. Jamaica is 8% Chinese. Chinese people are not foreign to me. White people are very foreign to me. I don't know anything about Jewish people. I don't understand it. I don't know Jewish history. I don't even understand Black Americanness. I know that there's the Caribbean and there are African people in the Caribbean. So my first day in Usedan Hall, a Black student says something to me like, "What are you?" The question was so particularly strange to me. And I was like, "What am I?" They were like, "Well, what are you?" I said, "I'm Jamaican." And because that's my answer to almost every question. And they said, "Well, are you not Black?" And I look at the person and I said, "Well, look upon me. Of course, I'm Black." Right? Like I didn't know where to put the question, because there was an ongoing intraracial challenge between Indigenous Black people and Caribbean Black people. And then there was the interracial challenge of Christian whites, Jewish whites, and all of it. And I had no sense of that. So at Brandeis is when I discovered Blackness. And I discovered what it meant to say that I was Black. And it was at Brandeis that I began to learn African and African-American history in order to be able to place myself in the conversations regarding race. It was also at Brandeis that the beginning thoughts, not very highly developed thoughts, notions of intersectionality became important, because gender and sexuality was abound, and they had a lot to do with how people saw themselves. And I had been firmly socialized as a heterosexual and a bigot. And so I never had any reason to have any considerations of people who were gay. And gay and Black and gay and Jewish and gay and international. So all of those things really Brandeis taught me about. But it was Brandeis that gave me the formalized as well as informal training around the power of social science research. I got to go to Grenada to study the revolution and invasion with Decima Williams. And I got to study a lot about Israel and Palestine with Gordy Feldman. And I got to study a lot about organizational dynamics and regulating the poor with Siriani. And so finally, the stuff started to make sense. America started to make sense to me, because this whole notion of regulating the poor that Gordy and Siriani were so serious about, I could see it in the Caribbean. So when I went to Grenada, I started to study the structural adjustment program and its impact on the dynamics of the culture. America made sense to me from going to the Caribbean, because I could see how American policies were affecting, but I also simultaneously got to situate myself as a Caribbeaner, but as a Caribbeaner living in the United States and the implications of that. So Brandeis did that for me in a way that I'm not sure any other school could have really done it. I was open, I was optimistic, but I was also so deeply ignorant. So, and plus I call a lot of trouble at Brandeis.
Yes, I can see some people who knew you then nodding their heads. I see you nodding your head. You did, but I think, and thank you for answering those first two questions, because we are here to talk about Parent Like It Matters, which is the topic of your book. But I think it is important to set some context about who you are, because it does really play a role in this book. Your personality certainly shines through in the book in terms of the way, there's the language of it, but also the way you think about all of these structures in our systems is so deeply researched and leaned on to make these arguments in this book. So I really thought it was important to set a little context there through the lens of Brandeis, since we're here at a Brandeis alumni event. But let's get into the topic at hand, which is Parent Like It Matters. I want to talk about joy, because as the book says in the title, here's the book here, it's not just change-making girls, it's how to raise joyful change-making girls. And we see a lot on social media about joy and finding time for joy and all of those things. And one of the things that you talk about here, is because much of what follows in terms of how to raise a change-making girl or children generally, specifically the interrelationship of joy, gratefulness, and equity. And you're wanting us to engage in being internally serene while also teaching our children about difficult and disruptive social issues. I mean, that could not be more important right now. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about those finding ways to create and sustain joy, both for ourselves as parents, but also for our children, especially in the most traumatic times maybe our generation has lived through, and certainly our children have been part of that. It is not to say that the systemic racism, the anti-Asian hate, all of those things are new. They've been going on for hundreds and hundreds of years, but they are currently at an all-time high as it relates to visibility. And there's a lot of re-traumatization for people, and even for people outside of those communities, like myself. Certainly, it makes the whole mix really heavy. Not to mention, hello, we're in a pandemic. So let's talk about the joy piece, because I know how important that is, and both for ourselves as parents, but also for our children. So talk a little bit about
Yeah.
that.
So this joy piece is, so I mostly just to kind of punctuate it, I mostly reject the common conversations about joy. I find them performative. They don't align with my definition or notions of joy. So in the book, I make a clear distinction between happy, which I define as performative, outward, kind of facing things where we're pretending with our emotion, and it's temporary. And I really think about joy as being connected to two core things. I think of joy as a reservoir of optimism that lives within us, that peacefulness. And I think about joy as agentic, as action-oriented. And those two principles are quite related. So for me, much of what I see in the public space is people who are deeply unsettled in who they are, attempting to create things that they argue is going to make the world a better place. But I think that that's quite difficult if the work doesn't begin with you. And much of what you will hear me say, no matter where you hear me say anything, is that I really think that if we want something external to us, whether it's in our children, whether it's in our workplace, whether it is in our families, we have to be able to have those things internal to us. So if we want a non-bigoted child, we really have to work on not being bigoted. If we want a peaceful society, we have to really work on peacefulness for us. If we want informed children, we have to become informed. And so the times in which I grew up, whether it's Jamaica or the United States, much of what we wanted, we simply projected out. We told our children, you need to be better than me. We told our workplace employers, you need to be better than me, right? So much of those things I reject off the top. But what I have to say around issues of inequity and in this moment is this is in fact a traumatically challenging times on many fronts. But each of us, if we are to survive this and potentially thrive through this, then we have to decide where we are going to act. If we make a commitment to some action, I argue that it will invite joyfulness into us and will move us out of the stalemate and the inertia and even the overwhelming feeling that this is a forever space, that it is in the process of acting, in the process of trying to achieve equity, in the process of attending to who we are, that we actually find joy and can make the world a better place. But to do that, we have to do a thing that I think many people find challenging, which is we have to be connected to other people. And that connection is really quite un-American, right? Is that in America, the notions of individualism aren't just theorized, they're actually really well practiced in families. The focus on you and yours, the focus on myself, the focus on my family, the focus on making sure my child is better than your child disrupts connection.
Right.
And connection is really what we need in this moment more than space. And we need to physically distance. I get that. And I'm saddened by the fact that we have been using the phrase social distancing, but whatever, that's for another conversation.
Yeah.
We need to physically distant, and we also need to be more socially integrated. And if we do that, I think we're moving ourselves towards more joyful people and also more equitable people that can move us along towards a better society.
Yeah, yeah. Give us an example, maybe one from the book that you think illustrates this point, because I think this is because it's so important to this book and what it's all about. I think it would be important maybe to follow up with that.
Okay. I would love to give you one not from the book.
Or not from the book. That's
okay.
Yeah, because we don't want to give away anything from the book.
You're right. So, I encourage you all to get the book, right? Clearly, and to read the book. But here is an example. Thank you. So here's an example. So right now, we're coming off of a very divisive, I'm going to argue 12 years. Some might say 4, but I'm going to say 12 years. And some of us hate our neighbors. We hate them because of our politics. We hate them because they supported candidates we didn't support. And yet we live in the same neighborhood. If anything happens, we are going to need that neighbor. We're going to need that neighbor if they smell smoke or gas. We're going to need that neighbor if somebody suspicious is outside of our door. We're going to need that neighbor if we're delayed in getting our children, etc. So, but some of us find it really hard to talk to neighbors whose politics are not our own. And I would argue that no amount of data has ever changed a person's mind. You could present to me every bit of evidence about why racism is illogical, sexism, homophobia, transgender hate is illogical, because really these things, they tap the social resources of society. But what I would say is if you have decided that you really want to convince your neighbor that equity matters, then you're gonna have to talk to your neighbor. And you should begin by talking to your neighbor about the most basic things that we can talk to neighbors about. If it's a building, the building that you live in. If it's a suburb like mine, it's the traffic on your street. Is that when you develop relationships with people, you can understand what undergirds their thinking, and you can find points of connecting. And you can have your own agenda about how you're going to move your neighbor forward. Now, bear in mind, your neighbor may be trying to move you forward too, right? To their standpoint, but you can begin to build coalitions that way. And the same can be done in your workplace. So that peacefulness that comes about, like, oh, I talked to them and I like, that's how they put it together, right? Like that is often the challenge for us, right? How do people put this logic together? And I say, take the moment to talk to your neighbor, your colleague about how they're putting it together so that you can understand how you could potentially reach them. Because we are a need to be more persuasive in order to move people forward. Anger, frustration, screaming facts and data will not move people towards equity. It simply will not. I've never been convinced. Ha ha ha! It turns out that, right? That's never moved me towards being kinder or better towards people.
Yeah.
Knowing, feeling, empathizing, that's moved me. And so I'm urging us, right, to do that in everything that we do. And if you're tired and you're sick of having to explain to people, don't do that. Instead, form relationships with people. It is the relationships, it's the connecting that moves people forward.
And I think that is connected to one of the things you talk about in the book as it relates to, especially in young children, when you're doing a lot of limit setting, and that just saying no isn't going to work. I mean, it will work, but it's not going to help the child understand your reasoning. And it doesn't help you understand your child's point of view. And so you talk a lot, you have this great section in the book about how to kind of negotiate those things to understand your child's point of view, because it helps you understand your child just as a person, how they think. So in some ways it's a little, it helps you kind of manipulate maybe in the in the future, but it also helps them understand how to build an argument, and how to have their own perspective. And I think that's a really powerful kind of progression in.
Yeah, it's really also really important for relationships. So many times, many of you are hearing on social media and in other places, like, no is a complete sentence, right? Or you say to somebody, it's like, racism is wrong. Okay, right? That just doesn't advance us in any way. Racism is wrong, but why? Right? Why is no incomplete? Because when we understand people and we can relate to people, then we can move people in different directions. What happens is that a lot of our angst comes from the fact that challenging being in relationship that has conflict and disagreement is difficult for us. So back to the Brandeis question, one of the things that I really enjoyed at Brandeis and is a part of my early is that we must embrace disagreement. Disagreement is actually really good for relationship building, because then you have to find a way to be more convincing, which is coupled both with emotion, information, and passion.
Right.
But many of us don't have the bandwidth for disagreement. We treat disagreement as the end of a relationship. So as this relates to parenting, a part of what we want is we want children who are thoughtful, who can negotiate, who are inquisitive, and yet we don't have democratic processes in our parenting. And those democratic processes of asking, listening, inquiring, convincing, we have low tolerance for. And then when we see that dogma in our children in other places, we're like, how did they get so dogmatic? But we never gave them any of the toolkits to be anything other than dogmatic, right? Now, I want to be clear for those of you who are out here, my home is not a democracy. My home it's a full oligarchy with democratic processes. Okay, I want to say that, right? Sometimes people get confused. They're like, oh, she's wishy-washy. No, they're democratic processes, but I am significantly older. I am in charge of my child's health and well-being, and that does require some authoritarian practices, but the democratic processes of thinking through and letting her know how I come to these conclusions help her to negotiate things in other places. But it is not a full democracy.
Yeah, and I think, to use another term too, I think you use it yourself in the book, is I think both you and Scotty are incredibly intentional in your parenting.
Yes.
And that is something that I think we all need to be, both about not just in our parenting, but in our relationship with whoever we're co-parenting with, whether it's a spouse or a significant other or a grandparent or a neighbor, as you said. How are we intentionally raising our children I love the oligarchy with the Democratic. That sounds about right. I like that. But I think that you talk a lot about that in the book throughout, not again about being intentional about how you're taking care of yourself and your partnership, and what that partnership looks like and who's responsible for what and where do those things overlap, but also in the spaces that you make for your child to be intentional about her own decisions.
Yeah, I mean, in the
Yeah,
end, children are their own human beings. It is
right.
very irritating that they're their own human beings. It's very irritating. So I sometimes I think sometimes when people have these imaginings of me, they're like, oh my God. And I'm like, no, kids are irritating at multiple levels, right? To adults, but they're mostly irritating to us because we're old. It's not that they're just intrinsically irritating. We were irritating, they're irritating. But a part of what we want is we want a more equitable and just world. I'm just really clear about that. And I think each of us want it. And what I argue is that the locus of control for having that equitable world is within the framework of our control. We want to make sure that when we show up at workplaces, right, that the people that we sometimes see in our workplaces, in our classrooms, et cetera, we're just like, who are you? And why are you like this, right? And so in kind of sociological terms, I think many of us forget about the saliency of socialization. Primary socialization is critical to the people that we're seeing now. Our value systems are developed in these moments in our parenting practices. So when we see people engage in an unjust behavior, their notions of truth, their notions of value of life, their notions of critical thinking, the fear they develop of others, a lot of that is within the way they have been parenting. And what I'm urging people to do is to be intentional about that desire.
Right.
You want that outcome, then you have to be willing to think about your role in it and how you are attending to the children under your guard in making that goal happen. I really want a just world. I want a world where little kids can actually play outside. And I'm not afraid that they're going to get snatched up and killed and taken away. And so I need to be in relationship with my neighbor. I also need to teach my child how to be kind to others. I need to teach the other children how to be kind to my child and to other children, because I want that. Every day I want that.
Right.
And so I don't relinquish that any day. It is top of mind every day. And so I've got to do something to make that happen. And I'm prepared to do that. And I think we all can be prepared to do that, but we have to be quite intentional about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think for some folks who have read the book or who are planning on it, so my daughter is 18, about to go to college, a year ahead of Marley, Janice's daughter, in school, and yes, the whole college thing, that's a whole other conversation, but we're going to get to that actually. And so for me, it was really interesting reading this book at this juncture, because much of the book does relates to what I would have done with Audrey when she was younger. And certainly I was like, oh, I did that, yay. But for me, it kept me thinking, and I know Janice is thinking this too, as Marley starts looking at college and they started to, dip their toes in the water of independence. So my question, Janice, to you, and my guess is you don't have an answer, but probably some thoughts, is how do we evolve as parents as our children get older and we have a little less control, and they need something different from us? I know already that, certainly Audrey needs different things from me now than she did when she was 5. And she's going to need different things from me when she's, away at college. How does our role as parents evolve with our children and continue to be focused on that joy, that real joy, and that change-making intention.
Yeah. So that, I mean, I'm here, right? So
It's
like,
maybe a sequel to the book, Parent Like It Matters, the college
yes.
years, I think we talked about. Yeah.
So a part of it is that I think that we always have to be prepared to be consistently changing. And in some ways, I used to say to my husband, I was like, you know, the mother that Marley knew up until she's 9 is not the mother she knows now. So for example, I have a really great potty mouth, right? And anyone who knows me knows that. But before 9, I made a full commitment that I was not going to introduce her to this mouth until she was 9. I felt like, and I just arbitrarily chose 9. I just want to let y'all know, I didn't, much of the things that I know are scientific, but I was like, I think I got it in me for 9 years. Like I feel like I could do that, right? So right
That's a
around
long time.
9 and
I'm impressed,
10,
by the way.
right? Like, because I was committed. I'm very good at commitment. Right about 9 or 10, then the F-bombs would roll when they felt like it. Not at her, but it was like the kind of control in my tongue was loosening up, right? Then she turned around 10 and 11. And in the book, you will hear me talk a lot about the watching and critiquing of the media that she has access to. And so around 10 or so, it changes in dynamics, right? She then has to tell me what she's watching. I can see also with all the different controls, she has to tell me kind of what she's watching. We really have to have a conversation about it, where the regulations. But I think from 10 to now 16, what has happened is I've started to introduce her more and more to me. Who am I? Not just, I mean, I've always kind of reminded her that I don't exist to serve her, but that I exist in relationship with her. But now it is about who am I? What are my insecurities? What are the things that I'm thinking about? What are the errors that I have made, as a way to help her understand that her humanity has to take precedence. She has to now begin to think of herself not as my child, but as a person really growing into her own, and that missteps are going to be central to this. In fact, I say more and more in this house, we talk a lot about errors. And what I've started to do, I started last year, was, you know, she has a set of aunties. I don't have any sisters, but my friends who are auntie figures, I've had to have them tell their stories of their college eras. So I have a bunch of friends who have PhDs, and she sees them as like fantastic. So many of them dropped out of school, went back to school, drank too much, did all kinds of things. And I've had them now been telling her stories of their mess up, because my concern is that children see their parents as flawless, and that they see adults as the end of eras. And I really want her to get the idea that the road is a windy one. And she's ahistorical, so she only knows this mother, but this mother is not all of who I am, right? Mm-hmm. And a part of the introduction of the F-bombs and others, and a part of learning about my errors and my missteps, is for her to see me as human, which gives her permission to see herself as human. And that is what I think will be going forward. Now, certainly, I really started the conversation around sex and sexuality very early. She really kind of don't really want all of the details, but I'm here for all the details, because that subject I knew I was going to be good at. I knew I was like, yeah, I'm going to be good at this one, right? But these other issues, I'm learning. And also she's a different American. She's an American in this moment in ways that I was not. And so issues about privacy, issues about choosing to resolve conflict face to face, she and I bump heads on, but she's beginning to finally see my side, which is to say, no conflict can be resolved electronically. You must choose to FaceTime or to meet in person, because that is a different thing than what you're doing right now.
Mm.
So humanity is really, I think if I'm human, it gives her permission to be human. And that's how I kind of see us going forward.
Right, right. So I just want to, we have about 10 minutes left. I knew this would go by very quickly. So if folks have any questions, certainly you could put them in the chat. I see a couple things that I'll just address here with you, Janice, but if you have a question you'd like to speak out loud, please click the raise hand thing if you can. If you can't, just let me know in the chat and you can unmute yourself. I think one person had a question, how old? So Marley is 16.
Marley's 16. I
Yeah.
started talking to her about sex at around 9. And sexual identity was always a part of it because we have many family members, really, for me, when I say family, my friend is also family, who are in same-sex relationships and have same-sex families. And so she grew up with that as a kind of a normative part of it, but she didn't understand people's hostility to it. So
Right.
we've had to talk a lot about that.
Yeah, great. And one person mentioned that they have an 18-year-old as well, and definitely finding it difficult to negotiate those bigger decisions and how much control the young person has over what they have in terms of, for instance, they mentioned the college decision-making process. I think, I'll just say I can look back to the high school process, which was probably for me, because if I live in New York City, for those of you who don't know, you can choose from basically any city school, any school in the city. There's some that you might have to audition for or take an exam for, but otherwise, if you live in Manhattan, you could go to high school in the Bronx. If you live in the Bronx, you could go to high school in Brooklyn, anywhere. And so we were going through that process with our daughter. And my husband and I really wanted her to stay at her middle school that went through 12th grade. She had very different idea about that. She wanted to go somewhere different. And we decided that it was important to let her make that decision. Even though as a former educator, as a parent, I felt really strongly that it was not the right choice, but we let her make that decision. And I have to say, it was the most difficult decision I had to make and allow for, but it felt like the right thing because I knew she would be resentful and unhappy if she didn't get to make that decision on her own. And it ended up being totally fine. She did great and she got into every college she applied to from the high school she went to, and it was all good. But it was something that I think, is hard to negotiate, and you have to make those decisions for yourself, what feels right for you.
Yeah, and I would say that I make a lot of errors. And how I define that something is an error is if after I've made the decision, sometime later, not like immediately. The immediate errors I usually just try to correct for. Sometimes I used to say that when I've done something where I'm like, ooh, that's one for the couch, right? Like that one's gonna stay, right? Like that one's like, it didn't land the way I thought it would. That decision was not quite right. And I'm now completely willing to forgive myself. I've had some big doozies that didn't work out, right? And don't work out looks like this, which is 6 months to a year later, I felt like the decision was either rushed, the decision was not fully informed, the decision was made out of fear. And I really work hard at not making decisions out of fear. And that's difficult as a Black woman living in a white suburb with a public child, is that I get concerned for her emotional and physical safety. And every once in a while, I make a decision where fear is the center. And I argue against that for myself. And I really encourage all caregivers not to make that decisions where we think the stakes are so high that fear drives us. As to the college process, a part of the challenge of raising a joyful change-making child is that they have a lot of words and a lot of opinions. And so the one great input I get to make around her college application process is, can we agree whoever gives you the most money is where you're gonna go to? right? Because we are the first out. That's how I try to describe it. We're the first not mired in poverty. And we really want her to not have some of the economic challenges that we have. So she has a chance to interrupt the history of being African people, poor people. And so I'm like, can we talk about whoever give you the most money? So apply to only schools you want to go to, for real. And whoever gives you the most money, can we go there though? Because because our economic situation, much of Marley's work is philanthropic. I work as a college professor. Much of my work is philanthropic. And so money matters. So she needs to select. That's, this summer is the selection. Please select schools you actually want to go to, because the money is going to matter, right? So just so you know, because I don't want to say no to my child because I don't have the resources to support her education, but I also am quite practical about those things. I see somebody asked me a question.
Yeah, so you have a couple things. One is just a quick question. So for those of you who don't know who Marley is, Janice's daughter, maybe you wanted to say a little bit about her, and because someone asked if she does activism coaching for kids, and so maybe her
She
book would
does
be a great.
quite a bit of that. So Marley is, she is the founder of the 1000 Black Girl Books campaign. She is also the host and executive producer of Netflix's show Bookmarks, where Black celebrities are reading books around social justice, identity, and others and it's active on Netflix. You can watch it. She has been in her 5th grade class when she was 10 years old. She became frustrated that none of the books had Black girls as a main character and set out to collect 1,000 books with Black girls as the main character. She's now collected about 13,000 books and has an online resource where you can find Black girl books by different ages. On Sunday, I leave for Jamaica to donate 500 of those books. We donated already 1,700, and she's donated books across the globe. You can also find her online. She is usually the person in conversations with some of the top leaders, from Hillary Clinton, Michelle Obama, etc. And she has written a book published by Scholastic titled Marley Dias Gets It Done, and So Can You. And most people think of our books as companions. So what she does in the book is she lays out how young people can tap into their skills and passions in order to make a difference in the world. And my book is really about what caregivers can do to support young people who really want to engage in this kind of level of activism.
Yeah. And I want to say that I think, that being joyful and change making doesn't mean being Marley, right? Like that looks different for every kid. And that, the goal isn't to produce all these Marleys, because that wouldn't work. And and not every kid has that personality or that, so I think that's really important. Like, no pressure, folks. Like, we're not.
And also the book is not about Marley.
No, it's totally not. Right. Exactly.
Which is, so I run the Grassroots Community Foundation, and all children look different and all caregivers look different. What I hope you extract from the book, which I think like Jen and I took for granted, is that your child, you have to raise the child you have, not the child you wish you have. You have to tap into the joy that is possible for your child in your change making. So for me and for Marley, change making looks a particular way. But for others, Jen does change making work that looks strikingly different, right? Some people it is policy, some people it is environmental, some people it's through the creative arts. So it does not matter what field you're in. What I want us most to focus our attention on is how can we use what we have as caregivers in the way that we are parenting our children, coaching, educating our children, in order to help them recognize that connection to people matter, that equity is an attainable goal, and that the peacefulness that they can have inside to help them do this in a sustained way. Because this is not a sprint. One in equity has to become a way of life. It has to be in everything that we do, and so ubiquitous that it feels almost like a religion, right? That is my hope for the way that we think about and do this work. we live it rather than we perform it.
Great. Well, we are just at time. So I think I had like at least 3 more questions, but I knew we wouldn't get to them. There's too much to talk about. I wanted to thank all of you for joining us today. And thank you so much, Janice, for inviting me to have this conversation with you. It was certainly a privilege. And I'm going to turn it back over to the Brandeis folks to close us out.
Great. Thank you so much, Jen and Janice, for being here with us today and for this great informative conversation. So many really great takeaways. For anybody interested, the link for the book is in the chat. You can also find out more about Janice on the website as well. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us. Thank you to all the participants here on the call today, and we wish you all a great day. Thanks so much.
Thank you all so much for being here. I really appreciate it. Jen, that was fantastic. I knew you would ask me fabulous questions.
Thank you. It's great.
So nice to see my peers. It's really quite wonderful. And I'll have to take my Brandeis pictures now with my sweater, my Brandeis sweater. And Thank you all. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Yes, my website, I assume, was pasted in there, which is just thedrjanice.com. And you can find me in all the things that there is to find about me. Next time we're gonna have to put together like 3 hours, Jen, at this point.
I know. Hi, Sharice. I see you in there.
I can't see Sharina. She's probably at work listening in. Hi, Amy. Oh, it is good to see good people in this way. All right.
For sure.
Now I have to go. So I have 300 books that I have to now go sign in my kitchen.
Great. Thanks again, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.